Brian, I still have you aboard, Fuller? All right, thanks. I think just take notes for now. So before I turn it over to Rep. Harshman, if, as I look at this bill, Brian, and I'll pull you back up on the screen here. As I look at this bill, and I tried to very hurriedly track the issues, not so much by the statute number, but by what they were. And I see one is rights of way. So we got those rights of way issues that we have in this bill. Two would be unified network, expanding the use of the unified network. Three would be a dig once policy for YDOT, wherever they put in a new road that doesn't have any conduit or fiber that they'd plow that in. We have state land fees. We have WildLink tower access, highway abandonment, and then a resolution on federal land. Is that, other than like money appropriated, Brian, is that kind of the big topics you think?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, the only note I guess I would make is that question, that piece about the abandonment and relinquishment really just goes with the right of way.
Gotcha. Okay, very good. So Representative Harshman, do you have any final words before I kind of run down this list and find out what people are interested in and what they're not?
I think, well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I really appreciate Brian's work on this and the subcommittee. It's one of the finest bills ever proposed. It is a little humor for our Wednesday. Actually, there's a lot of good pieces of this. It's gigantic, though, and we might want to trim it down. I think the ones that are, I think we've come full circle on this community anchor piece. And I think, probably, I would think that we'd probably stick with what we're doing, which are schools on the unified, and turn those really into our community anchors. And we were trying to look at what other states were doing. Some use their churches, some use their hospitals, some use their libraries. But we've already kind of broke that ground with our schools with a unified network. So to expand that would probably be more trouble than it's worth, frankly. And, but I do think we got to keep continually thinking about the education, but then the safety, public safety piece of that. I don't know if it's worth the fight over it. I think the right-of-way stuff's good. I think the dig wants is good. I think as the schools as anchors as opposed to the other. I think that telehealth provider is really broad. I think somebody will probably bring that up. And I think the leasing towers thing, we work pretty closely with YDOT and the director, and I think they've got that where they kind of like it. So I think we're in pretty good shape there. But anyway, it'd be interesting to see what everybody else has to say on the thing. But I think it's a tremendous asset, the WildLink towers, that we can continue to, keep working on. So that's my 2 cents on it as a preview to the act.
All right, thank you.
Thanks.
And in committee, I'm going to take public comment, and then I think we'll travel through this. I know that Senator Von Flateren has some comments. Do you want to make those now, or do you want to kind of wait till after public comment? What would you like to do?
Since I don't know what we're going to break up on this bill, I'll wait till after public comment. I have till 2 o'clock.
Okay, very good. And I will try to just raise your hand and wave if it gets close and I haven't seen you. So with that, I guess I would open this up for public comment. I'm trying to look at my list. It looks like we have a variety of people to comment. And so, Brian, if we bring some of those in, I see Liz Zerga. So I'm going to go to Liz right away because she's popped up on my screen here. Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You moved on my screen, so I'm looking for you. I'm sure you're there somewhere. Mr. Chairman, with respect to this bill, I'm not going to spend a lot of time going through it, but I just want to highlight a few things. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for going through and talking about your priorities in this bill. With respect to the first section, where you grant broadband internet right-of-way access along the public right-of-way, a couple of years ago, I think Chairman Lindholm will remember this. We went through the public right-of-way statute 126.813. And what we did there is we expanded it a couple years ago. I think it was 2018. You know, the years flow by, so I can't remember for sure, but I think we expanded it back then, and I'm looking at it here, a copy of it. And what we did is we updated it. It used to say that public utilities and telecommunications companies had access to the public right-of-way, and we updated it to include communications companies, and we defined that broadly so that it would include broadband and internet and all of that. So we already accomplished what I think you're trying to accomplish in section 1 with respect to the public right-of-way. Now, with respect to eminent domain, which is kind of tied in there to the private eminent domain piece, at one time, telecommunications companies did have the right of eminent domain, and when they were determined not to be a public utility anymore, back in 1996, they took away the telecommunications companies' private eminent domain piece. If you want to add that back in, it's fine with us. It's not something that we would hardly ever use. I mean, there might be the occasional time period. As you know, that's a big fight for private eminent domain. So what I would say with that is we're neutral on that. If you want to add it back in, that's fine. We're not anxious to have a huge fight with landowners if they're going to oppose us on that in this next session, but it might be a tool in the toolbox. I'll kind of leave that up to you.
Rep. Lindholm. Oh, yeah, I think he's got a question there. So, excuse me.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and to Ms. Zerga, I appreciate your testimony. And when it comes to the eminent domain, you're speaking of page 17, line 16 through page 18, line 4, I assume,
Yes.
on the condemnation piece. And so has there ever been a time when any of your entities would have ever used condemnation if they had the opportunity to use it, or before it was taken out of law, before that, where they actually did use it?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Lindholm, I'm trying to think back. Certainly, we have had time periods where we've had some problems getting private right-of-way. So I don't want to diminish that does occur. I do not remember. Well, I started lobbying for communications companies in 1997. And 1996 is when you took it away. So I can't speak to prior to 1996. I don't know if telecommunications companies used it back then. I'm not aware of any situation where my carrier said to me, hey, we really need that right to condemn. We've always found another way around, expensive, delay, whatever, but we've always found another way around. I'm not saying that it might not be useful on occasion. Just, you know, it's nothing that's pressing.
I guess, Ms. Zerga, while we're kind of on that section, the one thing in this on page 3 that was of interest is the time frame of 15 calendar days to push out a permit. I'm curious on your industry, your reps, you know, your clients' thoughts on moving timeframes.
Mr. Chairman, as you know, that is one of the things that we find frustrating sometimes is permitting, not with YDOT. I want to be really clear about that. YDOT has been fine. But we have on occasion had delays with respect to counties. More often, it was delays in franchises, which municipalities have franchise rights, and you have to go through those. And you have to go through city council ordinances, and those can take quite a while. It's not usually the permitting. Once you get the franchise with cities, most often you can get the permitting done in a reasonable period of time. So we visited the franchise issue last year and trying to speed that up and find some uniformity with municipalities on getting the franchise issued, and got a piece of compromise bill legislation through on that. It wouldn't hurt to have a permitting deadline, but that would be a small standalone bill, and it wouldn't involve the other parts of this that we already have, the public right of way. Ms.
Representative Summers, you are muted.
Thank you. Senator Von Flatern, please.
Question from Ms. Zerga was the 15 calendar days. Does every city council and town committee meet every 15 calendar days within that? Because they have to vote to give you authorization, don't they?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Von Flatern, that's where this language is just a little confusing, whether we're talking about permits versus franchises. Franchises, we addressed, and they can take a fair amount of time, and city council has to meet and pass those franchise ordinances. So I was uncertain as to whether this was intended to apply to franchises. If it was, that would be a real problem. Once you have a franchise, you still often have to have a permit through a public works department or something like that at the city. And for those purposes, the 15 days, might be workable. You don't have to go through the city council or the city for those kinds of things. And it may vary a little bit from town to community as to how they handle that. But the ones I'm familiar with, which is that some of the bigger communities, that's how they handle it, is you get a franchise. If you have a project, you go before the public works or the streets and engineering and put in a permit, and then they review it and turn it around to you with any concerns.
Thank you.
Go ahead, continue, Ms. Zerga.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So with respect to the 922908 on page 5, I know this is going to come as a huge surprise. YTA opposes that section for a lot of reasons that we've already identified, and I don't want to go through and talk about that in great detail again. You know our thoughts about that. So that is the ETS state competing with private providers piece. So we'll leave that where it is. You know our thoughts on that. As I move down, then I think that takes us to page 13. And there you're talking about road projects. And you're talking about every time a new highway department road project is commenced, that the department will install conduit as part of that road project. And what we've talked about before is that kind of a concept might be useful where there is a known needed middle mile or other project. But to have YDOT just start randomly installing conduit for every road project, regardless of where it starts and stops, that particular road project, that's not something that we would advocate for. because I think it could lead to a waste of state resources to have that done. In other words, conduit that goes for 3 miles and connects nothing to nothing, because that's where the new road project was. But on the other hand, it might be useful to have conduit for some middle mile stretches that are identified. That would require a rewriting of that piece, and I think I'll leave that part where it is. And then with respect to, we already went through eminent domain. Okay, with respect to the Department of Transportation, that piece with respect to giving providers access to their facilities and leasing facilities, I would agree with Mr. Speaker. YDOT is engaging with providers already on areas where it makes sense for providers and YDOT to engage in some kind of a contract relationship. And that seems to already be working. I haven't heard of any problems in that area. So again, if you think it's necessary to put it in statute and do something with that, I'll leave that up to you. But I would say the process seems to be working given the assets that YDOT has that are available. And in not all cases are the assets something that can be used for communication. So
Ms. Zerga,
yes.
so on that issue, and I'm trying to find, do you have that page number?
Mr. Chairman, my notes on these bills indicate that piece starts on page 23.
Okay, my question to you is, and eventually I'll get my question to the general as well, the director. But it seems like the existing statute is really cumbersome. If the Public Service Commission determines that it is necessary to provide telecommunications service to underserved areas of the state, it goes through this whole litany of things. And in the end, even it says, it talks about may lease capacity unless there's, only if there's no excess capacity available on private commercial communication facilities. So it seems to have already a whole bunch of, I guess there seems to be problems in statute currently. It seems like that either isn't being followed or it's cumbersome. And so have you read through the existing statute and really understand whether that's a good piece of statute as it exists now, or are you just thinking about the proposed changes?
Mr. Chairman, so there's a difference between a broadband provider, even if they are a telecommunications company, because telecommunications service is an entirely different thing than broadband, and telecommunications service is now a small regulated piece of the Public Service Commission's authority. And so, I don't see this current statute, the current existing statute, as having a lot of applicability in the arena of broadband, because broadband is not a telecommunications service. And so, what I would say is, I don't think the statute is actually being used per se or referenced. Instead, I think broadband providers and wireless providers work directly with the department if they want to try to lease something, and then the department looks at that and sees whether or not that's available. I see Director Reiner's on, so I'll let him answer the details of that. I don't think the statute as currently written is being used by telecommunications companies to petition the Public Service Commission to do anything.
No, that's my point. I don't think it's happening, but it's in statute. So
yeah.
General Reiner, just briefly, I know we're in the middle of Ms. Zerga's testimony, but if you could clarify what's actually being done? Why aren't we following statute if that's statute? And so what's going on, and is there a cleanup needed just to clean this up?
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The changes that were made to this section were really our recommended changes. To your specific question about why aren't we following and what are we following, I would respectfully ask that we allow Mr. Babbitt to talk that, because he will be more aware of the precise details that we're following.
Mr. Babbitt, maybe if you pop in. Bingo.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, please go ahead and tell us, if these are your recommended changes, that's good to know. And we may need a cleanup here. Is that correct?
Mr. Chairman, I would agree. I do think Ms. Zerga is right on the money. I do believe this is a little bit outdated. The telecom is different. Broadband is a more accurate term at this point in time to move forward. Department of Transportation, I think we've thought of a broadband obviously as that benefit, and we are willing to work with those service providers. So yes, I think there's cleanup that needs to occur on this.
Okay, thank you both for coming in, and Ms. Zerga, I'll let you continue with your comments.
Yeah, the one thing I would say, and we can visit this if there is some kind of a standalone bill or something that comes out of this for cleanup of that statute, you might want to consider not just broadband, but communications service, which is a broader term, because you might be talking about a wireless voice provider, so just some thoughts on that. But I agree, the current statute isn't being used, and if the department wants to have a statute on the books to be able to do what they're doing, and wants to clean it up, there might be some few wording tweaks to make sure it's comprehensive enough that it works for whatever kind of entities they want, that might want to be able to use those towers or facilities. And then as I go through, the rest of this is CARES Act stuff. We get to WyoLink. When we first looked at this concept, you may recall, we couldn't tell from the bill whether or not it was intended that the Department of Transportation own all of these CARES Act appropriation facilities, and whether they were going to be using them in competition with private providers. I had a good conversation with Director Reiner, and that was not the intent. I'm not going to try to stand in the way of CARES Act funding if it's available for WyoLink. If you can use CARES Act funding for WyoLink, great. And then that takes us to the last couple of pages are reappropriations. And then the very last page section, not the very last page, but page 34, section 5. This is an effort to address the issue that carriers have faced in trying to put in broadband on state right-of-ways that cross over federal land. And it is a big, big delay issue. So I really do appreciate this effort and all of the efforts of legislators in this regard. So section 5 and 6, with respect to sending in a petition to the US government and getting everybody on board with the federal delegation, I think that's great. I really do appreciate that. So those are kind of my very high level comments as I walked through the bill, and I'd be happy to answer any other questions.
Any questions of Ms. Zerga? Thank you. Thank you, Liz. I appreciate your time.
Thank you.
I think I'll go to Jody, Ms. Levine.
Levine, all works, Mr. Chairman. Jody Levine on behalf of Charter Communications. I will agree with and echo all of the comments from Ms. Zerga. There are some additional points and mainly questions that Charter has about these various sections if they are to move forward. The first one would be on page 4. These are lines 4 through 6, where it talks about you have to ensure that broadband internet service is made available to all persons adjacent to the right-of-way. So there's just a question about how extensive that is. Is that specifically tied to the application, or are you truly looking at the entire length of the right-of-way? We assume it is the former, but it's just a question. And I will also say that it's probably very unlikely, highly unlikely, that you would see Charter exercise eminent domain kind of in any regard. As Ms. Zerga pointed out, it's a highly controversial topic, one that carriers like to avoid. So while we appreciate the intent of those sections, it's functionally probably not something that would ever be used. Her comments on the unified network, we obviously share. We have a number of concerns about the unified network being expanded in a way that would take customers away from the private sector and compete with the private sector. But I would say we have, as an industry, engaged with the healthcare community. Ms. Hardesty can talk about this as well. We have started a conversation, hopefully it will be a routine conversation, just about, from a healthcare provider standpoint in the hospitals, what challenges are they hearing about? Is it entities that in town are not able to access services, and is that an affordability factor? Or is it rural constituents who they're trying to do telehealth visits over their cell phone and that's not working, and so they're trying to find other ways to access telehealth? And we did have, at our very first conversation, we did have some very specific challenges that were outlined by the hospitals, where carriers were largely unaware of the problem. And so hopefully we know in at least a couple of those instances, those problems have been resolved. So I think with anything, communication is everything, no pun intended for the conversation we're having. But unless we're aware of the problems and challenges, you don't know how to resolve them. And so it's a good conversation. We intend to have it be ongoing so that when these challenges arise and industry is able to respond, we're doing so. The challenge of rural constituents trying to access telehealth, I think will continue, but hopefully we're making progress in that regard. But overall, expansion of the unified network is of concern.
Ms. Jody, got a question for you. So,
Yes,
and on this issue, and it's particularly the affordability issue, something I would ask all of you providers to do is, what are your rates for these institutions versus rates in other states? Are you part of the reason that Wyoming's healthcare costs are so expensive? So are providers in Wyoming using these institutions and charging these institutions more than in neighboring states? That's my question.
Mr. Chairman, at least I can't speak for the entire industry, but for Charter's perspective, the answer is no. I mean, most of these contracts are very specific. They are negotiated for whatever services and length of term. If you have to do any construction costs to build out to the institutions, but Charter has nationwide pricing. So the prices that you see in other states are going to be similar to the prices you see in Wyoming. Circumstances can be different in Wyoming, but they use the same type of pricing mechanism. And when I talk about an affordability factor, it's not so much for the institutions, it's for the individual citizen, the constituent. And in that regard, there are programs. I know Charter isn't the only one who offers some assistance. I think at one of your previous meetings, I mentioned Charter has a program called Spectrum Internet Assist that is targeted to seniors and to any household that has a student who qualifies for free and reduced lunch. And that gives them special pricing on internet specifically to address this affordability challenge.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On page 13, echoing again Ms. Zerga's comments, lines 19 through 23, where you talk about all road projects being performed, that you would install broadband conduit. We would agree that this probably needs further review. You wouldn't necessarily want to install broadband conduit everywhere because you could be looking at an unnecessary expense. So you'd want to look at something that's more targeted for not only where is there no infrastructure, but where does it actually make sense to lay conduit? That's just more an editorial comment. Then, Mr. Chairman, on page 16, with respect to 36-1-122 and utilizing state lands and school trust lands, Charter did come up with one question, and it just is something, if this moves forward, we're going to need to do additional legal review, and glad to work with whoever sponsors a bill in this regard. But on the top of page 16, subsection B, where it talks about no fees, rents, or other charges shall be collected, there is a question about how this section could interplay with franchise agreements. So it's not something I have an answer to today, but it is something that they flagged to say, we want to make sure that this somehow isn't precluding franchise agreements or running afoul of franchise agreements. And Mr. Chairman, I think my final comment is on page 24. This is with respect to use of the WyoLink facilities. Lines 14 through 18 talk about a provider having to certify that the lease will result in a provision of broadband services of not less than 50 megabits download and or upload. I'm saying that the other way, 5010. Charter flagged this as a potential concern in that they offer tiered speeds and tiered services. And they just felt like this language may be a little bit restrictive in that where you're certifying that you have to provide that not less than 5010. We might want to tweak that just a little bit so that you could potentially offer less speeds and less pricing for those services if it's for the benefit of expanding broadband. Again, it's not something that I necessarily have a solution for today, but it was something that we flagged as potentially being overly restrictive. And those are my comments, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate the comments. Anybody have any questions of Ms. Levin?
Thank you.
All right, thank you. It looks like we have Mr. Glass up on the screen, so I'll bring him in.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Brett Glass of Lariat here. A few comments. First of all, I have emailed to you and to the other legislators on the committee the text of a friendly amendment which has to do with the unified network, but nonetheless, I think the lobbyists would be in favor of that, even though they're not in favor of the unified network competing with their networks. What it proposes is that the state authorize and provide funding for peering with the unified network. And the reason for this is that we have so many university faculty members, community college faculty members, teachers who are teaching at primary and secondary schools, state workers who all need to get effectively to the various state networks and to the unified network in order to do their jobs. Right now, my ISP and also other ISPs such as Charter have to go a long way out to throughout the rest of the United States in order to reach, for example, the university's network. Our packets going to the to Internet 2, which is what the university connects to, currently go through Chicago. And if you take a look at, if you do a trace of the route here in Laramie, to go down the street from a house that has charter to the university, it goes through Seattle. There's no need for this. Obviously, we should be able to have a direct connection, which is faster, has lower latency, has better response times. All of this is, you know, the boondoggle of going all the way out and then back is unnecessary. So what this amendment proposes, and again, I think there'd be universal agreement that this just makes sense, is to authorize peering between the unified network and ISP's networks. I could actually set up a peering point here in Laramie for all of the providers serving Laramie right now. I have the equipment sitting here in my office to do a 2 gigabit peering connection and ultimately more. But I'm hoping that this could take place all over the state and would help everybody. So I'd like to see this provision added to the bill. Again, I've submitted proposed text. It probably should go to LSO if there's general agreement on this to see if possibly we could do this. So, Mr. Chairman, I'm not sure of the procedure for that, but if it's possible, I'd like to ask that someone move that be done. The second point, Mr. Chairman, is one on which I disagree with the lobbyists.
Representative Lindholm has
sorry.
a question.
Oh, go
you.
ahead. Okay.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Mr. Glass. I appreciate the proposed amendment, and thank you for sending that to the committee and talking to me about it earlier. I guess my question would be: would that for the peering cost to be able to access that network? Would that be borne primarily, or would the expectation be borne by the entities, or would it be borne by the state, in your opinion?
It would be primarily borne by the providers, not by the state. There would be some small amount of state expense. When I talked to, for example, Robert Elward, the CIO at the university, he said, yes, we would have to devote some resources to that. And I told him we would make this as minimal as possible if we peered there. And we would pay for the radio equipment to establish a millimeter wave radio link right to the top of a university building with a built-in backup in case the main link went down. We would cover all of that expense. So I think some money should be authorized. I don't think that the majority of the expense would be borne by the state entities.
Thank you, Mr. Glass. Representative Lindholm.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Glass, do you have any estimates what that would cost? I'm sure you're well aware, you've read the paper, that the state of Wyoming isn't exactly flush, but this might be an area that we could possibly use CARES funds for. But do you have an estimation on cost, and did you delve down with the University of Wyoming in regards to what resources they would have to put forward towards it? Are they talking man hours, or if you could, or if you know?
Mr. Glass, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman and Representative Lindholm, it's mostly man hours. The hardware expense is minimal because you hook into an existing router and existing network switch. It's mostly man hours and maybe cable, which is very inexpensive. So we're really talking minimal capital cost. It's mostly just the time for someone to configure the router and hook it up.
Okay, Mr. Glass, please continue with your comments.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The second point that I wanted to talk about. Sorry about that. Is one on which I disagree with the lobbyists, and this has to do with the installation of conduit in state highway projects. I think that every road potentially could use the conduit, and plastic pipe is so cheap and so easy to install if you do it when you're digging up the road, and so hard to do it later, that it is a worthwhile gamble to install it anywhere you're digging up the road. And so I would say, let's just do it. We're talking costs in the hundreds of dollars to potentially save many thousands, even more than that later. And so I'd say, let's go ahead and authorize that. Yes, it may never be used, but it is in the long run, if some of it's not used, it doesn't matter. It is worth the gamble. There is one other point in the legislation that I want to address, and that is paragraph C at line 19 of page 3 down at the bottom. And it says, nothing in this section shall authorize corporations to set or install equipment, to install permanent towers along, across, or under any of the public roads, streets, and waters of this state. Well, if we're going to run conduit along the roads, the question is then, how do we reach the citizens and businesses along the side? One way to do that is by wireless. And in fact, if due to our low population density, it's one of the best ways to do it. So ruling out the installation of a pole, and it says towers, but there'd be some question here, and this should be clarified, putting up even a pole on which we could put wireless equipment that would cover that last mile between the road and the customer. Would be a bad thing. And I think that we should either strike this paragraph or clarify it. The second thing in this paragraph, which I think needs clarification, is that it uses the word corporations. My company is a sole proprietorship, not a corporation. So how does this affect us? We don't know. I think it should say something more general like business entities, because the word corporations creates ambiguity here, and we don't know what we should, don't know how this would affect a company like mine. So those are my comments, and I'll stand for questions.
Any questions of Mr. Glass? Mr. Glass, I appreciate your comments and thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
I see General Reiner. I know that this involves your bailiwick, so I'll give you a swat at this bill as well. So General.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, and some of this will be technical, and I'll ask Mr. Babbitt to jump in. But I'll tell you, generically, certainly YDOT wants to be part of the solution, and this bill does set up some of that for us. And I'll just maybe briefly walk through the bill and take a look at the issues there. So starting really on page 2, where it talks about 15 days in the application, I think we are certainly fine with that. If we flip over then to, I think the next section that really deals with us is on page 12. And there has been a lot of discussion now, and we've heard it.
Director? Hi, Director. Yeah, I do have a question on the 15-day. Have you checked or clocked, or what's your average time frame for getting permits out? Just if you got an idea, let me know. If you don't, that's fine. But I'm just curious what your time frames are, if you know.
Mr. Chairman, I would not be able to answer at this point. Let me see if Mr. Babbitt can.
Mr. Chairman, yeah, that's a pretty difficult. I do not have an answer for that. Each project has its own challenges, so I don't know if we even have an average that I could give you right at this time.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chairman, we'll take that as a due out though for you, and get that information back to you. So if we flip over then to page 12 and 13, really that's the discussion of, hey, should we be putting conduit in a road project when we do the road? And a couple comments there. One is there's a lot of miles of road in the state of Wyoming that don't have conduit, and by the time we get that dug up and replaced, it might be 100 years. And so for us to say that this is a solution for us as a state to get conduit in, I don't see it as a good solution. I'm not really opposed to putting conduit in when we do a big project, but I don't think it's a solution for what we're looking for. Would really be the comment. My recommendation to you is that if we want conduit, we put conduit in. It's a second project. It goes way up by the right-of-way fence. We do not put it close to the road. We want it away. And I really just see it as a second, almost a second project up by the fence line. And just because if we want it, let's put it in, and that's my comments on that, Mr. Chairman. I mean, the amount of road we're going to tear up is so small that this just doesn't get us where we need to be. So moving on, page number 21. In terms of the road and bridge construction, and actually it would be line 8, 9, and 10 on page 23 is the addition to that. Certainly, if it's the will of the legislature to enact 24-2-117, which is the one we just talked about burying a conduit, then that's a fine addition to the bill. Then you slip over to the next section that starts on the bottom of page 23, 24-2-116, dealing with communications. I would, I made the comment that some of those changes were our recommendations. Specifically, that was the 50% and the billing. And certainly we like the WildLink tower maintenance account. But I hesitate to talk details there. And let me just see if Mr. Babbitt has something to add to that section while we're on that section.
Mr. Chairman, the director, no, I do not have any additional comments on that.
Okay, thank you. And then moving on then to, I missed something somewhere in here, and the comment was about from Mr. Glass was about putting in, and I'm trying to remember where it was about, hey, we don't want towers or poles in the right of way, and I would say very affirmatively, we do not want towers or poles in our right of way. And it's a pure safety concern. I look at every accident report and every I look at every fatality report that comes into this organization that happens in our state, and we have way too many of them. And part of our charter is safety on the roads. And an obstacle that you hit if you run off the road on the right of way creates fatalities. And so our recommendation to this committee would be, no obstacles in the right of way based on a safety for you, your family, and for all of us. Moving on then to the next one I'm tracking is section 4 on page 20. It starts at the bottom of page 28. And Mr. Chairman, I think the discussion here is, and I think I'll turn this one over to Mr. Babbitt as well, but from my perspective, certainly as we were dealing and looking at using CARES Act money to facilitate a partnership between WildLink and Broadband to expand that capability across the state, this was a good deal, and we can use it. But if there's not CARES Act, then I'm not sure that this is a realistic expectation. Mr. Babbitt, what would you add to that?
Mr. Chairman, Director, I agree wholeheartedly. I think this was the concept that we were going with when we thought there was a possibility for expansion of WildLink with CARES Act funding, the 17 towers as well as the 55 locations for fiber build out. We did apply for that. It was not approved, and I agree with the director. It seemed like this is not relevant at this point in time.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, if we could do these projects, we'd be better off. But in terms of, available resources, available fiscal resources without CARES, I don't see that as realistic, a realistic expansion. If you flip over then to page 34, section 5, certainly we can make that request. We've already verbally, sort of talked over the issue with Federal Highway, and as you might expect, they're not hugely in favor of that approach, but that certainly shouldn't stop us from asking. And I do understand that there's some efforts behind the scene to streamline that, so that would be helpful. And then the provisions under section 6 in terms of seeking gubernatorial approval and transmitting the request to the congressional delegation. Certainly, that's something we can do. Mr. Chairman, that's a pretty rapid look at the bill, and would stand for Mr. Babb and I would stand for any questions that you might have.
Does anybody have any questions of the director? No, I appreciate your time and for hanging in there with us, and thank you for your input.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And your willingness to work with us. Appreciate that. I see ETS popping in. Director Knopp, do you have any comments?
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair. Yeah, we do have a couple of things for consideration. Thank you for the opportunity. Not knowing where this committee may put emphasis on the various pieces of this bill, I'll make a few comments, and again, please guide me if that's an area that won't be of strong concentration. First area that I'd like to look at is page 5, and starting at line 2, where it talks about the expansion of the unified network. First thing, we do want to make sure that we are not intending to compete with public providers, but we do understand that there is a possibility to provide some extended services. We are unsure, as it is our understanding that many of the communities do have the services that are outlined in here. So, and we'd be happy to work with communities if we need to that need that. But wanted to put out there that I believe most of those are in place. The next area I want to hit as a highlight is on page 20. And when we're looking at access points in schools, if there is a recommended staff comment at the bottom of page 20, and that causes a little consternation for us for the following reasons. If ETS is directed to install and maintain that equipment inside of the network of each school district, that places us in an awkward spot. As a state entity, we would be going into another entity's network, and they would have to make accommodations for us from a security point of view, for access to the facility, things along those lines. It would be much more efficient to put the onus on each school district to do this. They have staff that do this work around the clock now, and they have resources in place to do that. ETS does not. We have a field service staff, but not one that can accommodate providing service and maintenance in a manner such as is described here. And then again, the logistics of actually getting into the physical areas and then connecting to their networks. We don't manage their networks now or any piece of them. We give them an internet connection through our contracts with vendors, and then each school district manages their own access points inside of that.
And so Director Knopp?
Yes, sir.
Would you be more comfortable with the solution that was brought out in appropriations, which is just purchase the routers and the districts put them in, and then if it doesn't violate the whatever it is, the E-rate statutes? Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I would be more comfortable. I would be most comfortable if ETS would, or if the money would flow to the district so they could buy their own equipment to make sure it's compatible with their network, right? Because if we buy brand X and they use brand Y, then there's a potential compatibility issue, but also in the management of it. If they're just buying one more access point, because in any given building, say they have 10 access points, and we're going to add 2 or 3 more, let them choose their vendor and their install. They already have the contracts in place. I think it would expedite the installation. I think if ETS did it, then we have to go out and bid, and then we have all the management issues. We're asking an already strapped technology staff inside of a district to now manage 2 different types of equipment. If I were king for a day, I would say, let's get that money passed through the districts and let them know, hey, get these installed by December and get them turned up and then certify that you've done so. So I sort of went above on the answer. I hope that's appropriate, Mr. Chair.
No, thank you. Please continue.
You bet. Mr. Chair, the next area would be on page 33. There is a paragraph or section 5, subsection B. Hopefully I said that correctly. The bottom paragraph on the page. It alludes to potentially changing the JAC approach for the telehealth carts and shifting that from ETS to the Wyoming Department of Education. While I appreciate that from the standpoint of the Wyoming Department of Education has a means by which to receive applications from districts and distribute funds, which we could stand up, but we've never done that as an agency. I would offer that you may want to consider including the Department of Health in this, considering the content of what it is. While it is technology, the purpose of the technology and the expertise of what would be a good cart, what would not be a good cart, the Department of Health, I think, could bring to bear resources better than ETS or WDE. So that's my third comment. And then Jason Miller is also available if there's any technical questions. I would offer one additional insight. There was a question about internet on buses. And in my past life as the director in Laramie 1 for the last almost 20 years, I will tell you, we looked at that option. And one of the questions we had that wasn't answered when I was there, so it might've been answered after I left, was it's a great idea when there's actually cellular service available. But when that bus is traveling, if there's no cellular service available, it doesn't benefit the student. So that's, I don't know what the purpose would be. And then the questions we had, if the idea was, hey, if there is a pandemic and schools are shut down and we want to park those buses in neighborhoods, because that was a discussion that some people had. I don't know if that was the intent of this group. I would offer for your consideration that we need to either have a staff member of that school district in the bus keeping it running, because the bus has to be running in order to power the equipment. And then do you let the students in, or do they have to stay outside for social distancing? Those were questions that were asked of me by school districts. And I would just ask of you, those are things to potentially consider. So with that, I'll stand for any questions.
Director Knopp, I appreciate it. Any questions of Director Knopp? Representative Yin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Knopp, I was wondering if you heard Mr. Glass's testimony and his idea of making peering available for the unified network to providers, and whether that's something that ETS would be interested in, and what the difficulty would be for implementing that.
Chairman Summers and Representative Yin, the answer is we already do peer with providers. We don't do a 2 gig peer, we do 10 gig peering. But I would ask Jason Miller to provide any additional details that are warranted here.
Mr. Miller.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman. Hey, thanks. Yeah, Gordon is correct. We do peer with other providers currently. If that's something that Mr. Glass would like to investigate, he can certainly reach out to me directly, and we can work on that direction with him. That's been a solution that we've used for other providers in the past.
Thank you. Any other questions of ETS from the committee? Not. I thank you guys for coming aboard, and I guess I think, Brian, do we have anybody else for comment, public comment, agency comment?
Mr. Chairman, I didn't have anyone else signed up.
Senator Von Flatern.
Thank you. And I'd like Mr. Fuller to be on this as well. So could I do several questions in a row, sir?
Oh, please go ahead, Senator.
Okay, so on line 9, page 1, we say on public roads on federal lands, shouldn't that say ask permission of federal government to have the right of way on our lands?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Von Flatern, I think the language on line 7 where it says requiring application for covers that, I guess, that sense of permission that we would be seeking.
Okay, that makes sense. So you said that on page 3, line 3, It starts above that, streets and waters of the state in such manner as to not to inconvenience the public in their use. Shouldn't that be minimally inconvenience the public? Because construction does inconvenience the public.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Von Flatern, I think that would be a question for the task force to decide. The one thing I would note is this language is based on other existing statutes that we have for granting right of way, that's the standard that those statutes use for determining that grant.
Thank you. And then on line 6, 7, and 8 of that same page, a person shall file an application with the Department of Transportation or the Board of County Commissioners in the county where the construction is contemplating before entering upon any state highway or county road. So does that cover state highways? It covers county roads. It covers the city streets, but what if a state highway runs through the city?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Von Flatern, that is a good question. Right now, the way the language is drafted, it contemplates that the entity would apply to YDOT for permission on that state highway. Perhaps, Mr. Babbitt or the director, if they're available, could, opine more on this, but I think the state would still be responsible for the state highway within the limits.
Okay.
Senator Von Flatern, one thing before you get away that I want to get out of you is your general idea on the broad topics. Do we even want to move anything forward? So as you consider your comments here, and I know you've got some detailed comments, but I'm interested in one, what are the big topics? Are you interested in any of the rights of way sections? Because we can change anything. Are you interested in any unified network, any dig once, state land fees, kind of the big topics? Are you opposed to all of them or like a couple? That sort of thing will help us as we me at least, as we straw poll this to decide if anything's worth saving or not.
So, Mr. Chairman, I would say that section 4 on page 28 at the bottom is no longer usable. I mean, that's the deal that deals with YLink, and if you get it done by December 30th, and I don't think that should even be included. If it is, it should be a separate bill. And the thing about asking for federal land, that seems like that should be a separate bill from right-of-ways, because we're doing state right-of-ways, and that seems fine. And Wyoming, on page 16, Wyoming residents, students, and businesses, if constructed on state lands, the question there would be, what if they feed somebody that's on a state or across in Idaho? That would be a question. Would it now have to charge something separately from that? But I think the fees and all road projects commenced, page 13, on bottom of B. I do agree with the lobbyist on that isn't necessary to put in conduit on a 3-mile, doesn't go to anything. So I would strike that whole section on putting in conduit. I think that's the big points, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, and Senator, I didn't mean to cut you off, but I did want to get the big points and see where you were at on those when you have to leave.
Not a problem at all, sir.
Thank you. And so I don't think, Brian, we have anybody else on public comment. We're good.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Woody did note that he was available if there were any questions of him.
Okay, thank you. And so I guess I'll close public comment. and I'll come back to the committee. And what I really want to do is pick up these big topics, rights of way. And so Representative Lindholm.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm leaving now.
Thank you, Senator Von Flatern. Representative Lindholm.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So the condemnation piece, I had the opportunity to reach out to some of our friends in agriculture, like the Farm Bureau. They're pretty ornery about that. They're not going to want that in there. So I think we better get rid of that. On top of telecommunications saying they're not really going to use it anyways. And then also the portion on the unified network, that'd be page 5 all the way through page 12 would be, I'd want to get rid of all of that.
So let's start with, do you have to leave or are you going to be able to stick around?
No, I can stick around and I definitely want to be part of the debate.
Okay. So I'm going to start with the big topics. I'm going to start with first the rights of way. And I just want to get a straw poll. I think everybody agrees, like condemnation part aside, do we have any interest in doing anything on rights of way, like to get permitting done in a certain length of time? Is that worthwhile, not worthwhile? And to a degree, I'm going to rely a little bit here in this discussion on Barbara and then the co-chairs of corporations. I would like to hear your thoughts of whether there's anything worthy here or not. So Ms. Sessions, maybe I'll start with you and then I'll roll to the co-chairs.
Sorry about that. Yes, I think that there is some valid points in the right-of-way discussion, and I think we should continue with that.
Okay. Senator Landon.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. First of all, I support going forward with something, but I was sitting here thinking of a good friend of ours that we lost, Senator Larson, who passed away this past week. And I remember very well, Mr. Chairman, him standing in front of the Senate on these resolutions that we send off back to Washington, D.C. And I know that Senator Dockstader remembers that when he would stand up and he'd say, you know, this is kind of like barking at the moon. He said, I've talked to some people back there in Washington, D.C. and he said, I don't think they've ever seen these. So he said, I don't think I'm going to vote for another one of them. But anyway, just a salute to Grant Larson, one of our great statesmen. But the point of that story, Mr. Chairman, is that if we go forward with this and we have an intention to try to get some blanket easements out of the federal government, I think we should have our expectations in the right place. But at any rate, I'm sure willing through our corporations committee or elsewhere to support moving forward on some of the easement stuff.
Okay, Senator, Chairman Landon, I guess I agree. I should have been more explicit. The resolution aside, I'm talking about really what it would be forcing cities, towns and counties into a specific number of days to get their permitting done. I think that is I think the franchise thing was brought up. That's kind of a different topic, but do you think there's some validity in that going down that path to look at that? You have far more knowledge in this area than I do. So, question.
Mr. Chairman, thank you for that clarification. And I didn't mean to get us off on the county road, but absolutely, I think there's room. And I think anything we can do in this day and age to take a look at ourselves and to expedite processes, if possible, just makes a lot of sense. So many times we get contacted by our constituents. We often talk about the federal government, but sometimes it's us that we have bureaucracy and delays. And we had great testimony today from our providers that, that's something that would really help our businesses out across the state. So absolutely. I say we go after it.
Representative Lindholm, what do you think? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, no, Mr. Chairman, I think the Corporations Committee for the last couple of years has been very pro on moving the ball on a lot of these different types of ideas. We've dang sure worked kind of harder topics, or at least harder to get your arms around. And you brought up the franchise fee issues, so yep, I don't think there'll be a problem.
Okay, so just a straw poll of the members here. How many would support, not the condemnation piece, but trying to tighten up the timeframes by which permitting would get done by towns and counties? Just kind of a show of hands, those that would be for that. Looks like that's a majority. So what I'm going to do is co-chairs Lindholm and Landon, and maybe work with Ms. Sessions when you can. If you guys could and work with Brian Fuller to pull that out as a separate, it's really going to be a separate bill, very clean. I don't think there's going to be much to it. Maybe you guys could work on that, and then we can get that back. If it doesn't end up, going towards a committee, maybe one of us can sponsor it as an individual bill. And so the next place I'm going to go is the Unified Network, which has a lot of challenges, but I know Speaker Harshman, this has been near and dear to your heart. So I'm going to give you the first blast at this before I poll people. So.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I think you could take all that out of there that's really in there. And I think that was kind of the first salvo of it way back last spring. We're trying to see what other states were doing. And I think really we're kind of unique where we have all of our schools on the Unified Network. And I think really that's the way to go with this, to make those our community anchors. They're already there in every community. And I think the, Director Knopp pointed out that, the language issues we need cleaned up. We can clean that up when we work the bill or however, but where each district, does this, we fund it and they do it, and in each community. So, and they know how to work it with the E-rate. It's after school hours and all that. So that's a pretty simple solution. But I think, we're trying to copy other states, and we probably don't need to do that right now. If we can do this with our schools, that'll be a unique Wyoming solution on that piece. And
Speaker Harshman, it'll take some money. I forget what the appropriation, the appropriation. What's that?
Yeah, and it's not much, Mr. Chairman. It's less than it's in the tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands. It's not in the tens of millions.
No, I think it's $1 million or less. But so that idea, and that'll be more like the appropriations bill, which is you just buy the routers, whether ETS buys the routers, districts buy the routers, and you can't run afoul of the E-rate. I think that took away, at least when I talked to Ms. Zerga about it, that took away, I think, much of her concerns. But I'm going to ask Ms. Sessions, are you guys as industry fairly comfortable with that piece of it?
Yes, I think so.
Okay. And I know you can't speak for everybody, but in general rule that, yeah. And so just to kind of a hands up, all those would kind of support kind of going down that path, and we'll get a bill kind of worked on that. So all those in favor of that?
Oh.
Okay. So I think we moved down the road on that. And so Speaker Harshman, I'll put you in charge of getting a kind of a bill draft ready for that. And I think if we're going to do money, I think one thing we need to ask Brian Fuller is, we could also make this a recommendation to the governor with CARES Act money. And so is the group good with that? All those in favor, like recommendation to the governor, he takes care of it with CARES Act money if he has some?
Mr. Chairman, Do we want to, Brian, do you know if that fits into the CARES Act? That part, this, what we're doing here with these?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Dockstetter, I think the purpose of this would have to be facilitating, distance learning, improving telehealth capabilities during the public health emergency, to have that tie into the CARES Act. I mean, those limitations on those funds would apply to this expenditure.
Thank you.
Sure. And Senator Dockstetter, I think we'd be pretty good because a lot of schools are doing virtual schools as well, or utilizing other schools, virtual schools. So I do think I do think there's a lot of virtual stuff going on. So I think it would be easily within the realm. So I guess my question is back to the group. Are you good with that as a recommendation to the governor? So if you are, raise your hand. Okay, so that having done that, Brian, we'll put that together in a recommendation, and Speaker Harshman will work on a bill.
And Mr. Chairman, just to clarify, you just want that included in the letter, in that same letter that you discussed this morning?
Sure, I think all of our recommendations out of this meeting could go into one letter. If we have any others, we'll do the same. Thank you, Brian. On the one dig policy, I think we heard loud and clear. I think as we go back to recreating the existing broadband grant program, I think we're going to have the ability to try to, and at least it's my hope, that we try to engage state agencies, including WYDOT, where we actually need something, then we do it, and we make sure we try to get that back to refine, make sure we have a public purpose, but at the same time, make sure that broadband providers are actually running those networks and not the state. So does anybody really want to save this other than just the idea for the existing broadband grant program? I don't see anybody raising their hand. The state lands fees thing, I like it, but I don't know what you all think. I mean, I like the fact that we kind of try to reduce the cost, the burden on broadband on state lands. But what are your thoughts? Representative Lindholm, you always have a thought on this sort of issue.
As far as the 1% fee, Mr. Chairman?
Yeah, Representative Lindholm, I think it would be, do we want to delve into state lands and actually do a 1% fee and cheapen it up to make it more attractive for broadband providers to utilize state lands?
Honest answer, Mr. Chairman?
Yeah.
All right. I want to let her buck with both barrels. The state lands and the leasing fees that they apply to them are a flat joke compared to private lands. Therefore, unless we're willing to raise the lease fees on that land, it's a waste of time and it's a waste of money for the state of Wyoming and the school districts. So it makes perfect sense to me that at least by providing this opportunity to broadband companies, at least there will be a benefit to the community where that state land is. Whereas now there is no benefit to that community.
Senator Landon.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I appreciated those comments from the corporation chairman. I have sat here this afternoon trying to get arms around the language on the bottom of 16 and top of 17. And it would be helpful to me to have a little more conversation about. I was sitting here thinking over the last 2 to 4 or 5 years, we've been trying to remind ourselves of the fact that state land is to benefit our schools out there. And yet we're wanting to limit what we might want to try to get as a lease payment out of those state lands, which would benefit the state in some way. The flip side, of course, is that you provide access to a piece of property that might expand our services to our constituents. So I'm really conflicted here and would really appreciate anything further from, and maybe Representative Lindholm can help me out. Thank you.
Representative Lindholm.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And that's a great point brought up by Chairman Landon. And I would normally agree if everything was equitable, right? But state leases have been and never will be equitable. It's pennies on the dollar compared to private leases. And so it being the case that these are small sections, these school lands, and a lot of public land are small little parcels, especially over on the eastern part of the state, small little parcels throughout. There's no big money gain on any of those leases. And I don't expect that if we all of a sudden said you can do cellular leases or broadband leases on those state sections, that all of a sudden those that manage our state leases would change their mind as far as this one area. I imagine it would be much like the rest of the leases, which is, it's really super cheap. It's great the way we have it currently set up right now for those that lease state land because it's, like I said, it's pennies on the dollar, but it's not anywhere close to what private would go for. And so that's essentially where I'm coming from on supporting the 1%. Is no matter what we do, if we say it has to be equitable, well, the definition of the state and equitable between private is not market value at all. And I say that fully intending to state that I don't believe the state is doing its job in regards to leasing of these public school lands, of these state land leases. And in part, much like the federal government, it drives down the cost of anybody else that leases out grass. It drives down the cost in private. So that being the case, we might as well put it out at 1% and make it really advantageous to put these things up.
So Ms. Sessions, you're probably the only one that has any experience with, as a provider of putting structures on state lands. The question I'd have for you is twofold. One, is it a burdensome price? And two, knowing state government, is the time that it takes to get through the process cost you more than the ultimate license? So do you have any experience, and what has been your experience?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Most of the land that we look to lease it's all about the location. And so at least in our area, we are on private land, mainly because of where we need to locate our structures. The 1% sounds great as long as it's in an area that we need it to be in. Otherwise, we just look for private entities to lease from. I'm not sure that was much of a help answer, but that's my experience.
No, that's fair enough. And I think probably, I'm going to guess in your area, there's probably less state lands than in many other parts of the state.
Yeah, there's a couple of school sections, but not much.
Fair enough. Senator Dockstader, any thoughts on this? I see your mic coming undone.
We got 74% of our county is federal land, so it's not state. Anyway, let's proceed.
Yep. Okay. I don't see anybody really jumping up and down for this, so I think we'll lay it down on the table for now, and if anybody wants to pick it up, they can. Wirelink power access. Speaker Harshman.
I guess I misunderstood. I thought we were moving forward with that.
Me too.
I think Senator Landon thought the same.
Okay, fair enough. I'm good with that. We'll move forward with that. And Senator Dockstader, I'm going to put you in charge of that one to kind of coalesce that bill up and get it going. The Wirelink tower access, I like this bill. I think it's a cleanup. We just need to work with YDOT and get the language right. Anybody disagree with that? We all good? All those in favor, raise your hand. That way I won't screw up like I did last time. Okay. We will work on that. I will work on that. I'll just assign myself to the task of working on that piece of it and getting with YDOT. And so the next one I have, I think we heard on the WildLink funding from the department that unless it's CARES Act, that it's no go. I think if there's an extension on CARES Act, or if there's another pot of money, that will come back as something in the future. I don't know that we need to work on it. Representative Harshman, do you disagree?
I think you keep it in there, and you can put just the language, you know. But I think you keep it in there, and you keeps the education process going, keeps the number out there that we've done the work on. I don't think it.
So Representative Harshman, is that a separate bill, or would we put it in? I don't know that we even have at this point. We don't have. We have a WildLink tower access bill, so we could throw it in that same place if there's an interest in doing that. It'd be CARES Act money, right, Representative Harshman?
Correct. Yeah, that's how I'd say it. But I like all this stuff in one bill. But anyway, that's just me. But yeah, no, that's fine. I think you could put it with that other that bill. They go nicely together.
Senator Dockstetter.
I'm with the speaker there. A little concerned if we separate things out, it gives us something to skeet shoot with. So anyway,
hey, if you guys want, we can do it in one bill. It gets really cumbersome, and some things could die because other things, for example, you know, some of that early rights of way stuff is really a cleanup. I mean, it's not really a cleanup. It is policy, but do you want it to drag down something else that you guys got more experience, as much experience as I do. So Senator Dockstetter, do you want it all in one bill? We'll do it in one bill. What would you like?
Do I get ground support from the speaker, Mr. Chairman?
Well, I think thanks, Senator, Mr. Chairman, I think, you know, a couple bills would be fine, but I think if we have 5, 6 bills, I think we'll get picked off. I think it gets a little confusing that way and then get lost. Sometimes one big one, you know, as you said, it gets a little overwhelming, but I think a couple bills we could organize this into, and you know, Brian obviously could do that. Some of these kind of roll together a little better, and taking out all that, unified network stuff. That's 8 pages of the bill, I think, or it slimmed it down a bunch.
Okay, so what we'll do is those people that have been assigned to sections will still have those sections. We'll bring them back. Brian, you think about how it might be organized, whether it'd be better organized in 2 bills versus 1 bill. And then we'll go from there. The highway abandonment issue, is that something that had to do with the one dig, didn't it, Brian?
Mr. Chairman, that would be a conforming amendment that would go with that right-of-way bill.
And the right-of-way, and that the right-of-way bill, if it just becomes about time frames, it's not pertinent, right?
If, Mr. Chairman, that's correct. If it's just about the time frames, you know, I guess the question then, and I'm not sure if this is the time or if, you know, the group assigned to work on the bill should discuss this, but is whether a separate section is needed, whether these time limits would apply only to broadband providers, or if they would apply to other communications company as provided in existing statute.
So we'll let that group, I believe that was the co-chairs of corporations. So you guys make that decision. If you end up with the highway abandonment in it, fine. If you don't, fine, and we'll just take your recommendations from there. The only other thing I have is the resolution to the federal government. And that could be in the right-of-way bill, whatever section. I don't think there's a reason not to do that, to petition the federal government. Senator Landon.
Mr. Chairman, that's exactly where I was going, and I appreciate you bringing that up. I think it's worthy of consideration to move into a rights of way bill. As much testimony as we received on that front, I honestly think we ought to try to include much of the language that was considered by our subcommittee. But that's just me. I think it's worth going forward with it. We can work it when we see the final product. But I agree with you. I think we put the federal piece in there, but as I mentioned, we just have to temper our expectations. Thank you.
Fair enough. And then Speaker Harshman, I guess we got the school, we got the school piece on the anchor, the Wi-Fi routers anchors. So we got that. So is there anything left, Brian, that you think I've missed in this bill that I don't have assigned to somebody? I'll go with Brian first, and then I'll go with Speaker Harshman.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I think the only two items that they were in the staff comment at the end of the bill that the working group had highlighted, and that was the funding for the Department of Corrections, and then the separate funding for the telehealth equipment for schools. And I believe Ms. Hardesty sent an email to the task force members about those 2 points.
Speaker Harshman.
That's exactly right. Those are the only two that are left off. I think that telehealth in prisons, that was an efficiency commission recommendation as well. It's about $250,000 save on all the transportation and security costs. And then the telehealth in schools, it's probably $5 million or less to every school, but I think the parts that were talked about were maybe to have the Department of Health. WDE would be the great place to send it out. But as far as picking those, be the Department of Health, probably it was suggested to us. And they'll be able to work it in with training and all those kind of things. But yeah, that'd be a really, and that could probably go, that's all in that kind of that idea with, but anyway, I think those are the last two, and that'll be good. So I think it'd be a great recommendation as well.
Are you guys comfortable with those recommendations? Telehealth.
Yeah.
Representative Lindholm, you had a question?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is back on the school Wi-Fi thing. One of the concerns I've got with that is when we're doing that as like a community anchor point where people can go use Wi-Fi, and I don't hate that idea, but there is a certain number of the population that can't go to schools because they made some horrible decisions, and they're probably horrible people, but just the same, they're community members and they're not allowed near schools. I hate to be the guy that brings that up, but that is, is it possible we could get in trouble for that? Setting up something for everyone except for you guys? Is that a thing? I don't know.
So I think Representative Lindholm, the primary reason for setting it up is if you do have kids that, for example, that may need to isolate or do something online that they don't have any access at home that they could come do it, or it is a community anchor. There are other community anchors I don't know about in your area, but my library has that, so public can go inside and do that, and if you sit close enough to the door, you get it from the outside. So I think there's some of that going on, but no, I think it's still a good deal. Is there anybody that has any concerns about the telehealth? Are we all good with the telehealth piece being put in? All right, good enough. Speaker Harshman, I'm going to put you in charge of that as well. It's kind of the same deal. Those two things are almost like one bill. Anything else to do with this bill that we want to discuss?
Mr. Chairman.
Representative Lindholm.
Number one, I did send you a request for your shipping address because I've got a monitor headed your way. You you need a second monitor, brother.
Oh, you are bad. I didn't respond. Representative Lindholm, I didn't respond to that text because I was afraid of what you might ship me.
And then also, Mr. Chairman, I was just making sure that, and I might have missed it, but the portion about the that the network being used by the hospitals and stuff, is that out? I might have missed that.
Yes, it's out.
Well, that kind of takes away the fun of the day.
Yes, so I think we're all good on this. My intention is we'll, Brian, go ahead.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I think I have everything. The only item I did not get down in terms of any sort of decision was that DIG 1 statute, whether the task force wanted that included or not.
It's out. And Brian, I think, you know, in another day when you get all the notes kind of organized, Brian, if you could kind of send us all out a little reminder of what we're supposed to do after the assignments that we got today. And then my intention is, and maybe you can look, is, you know, if we could get another meeting into October, 1st of November, 1st of November probably is good enough. And that way, if we have any bills, they'll either be private bills or we'll try to take them to management council or something. I think if we get them out first part of November, that'll still give us time to run it through perhaps a management council, certainly a private bill. Does that work for you, do you think? Is that a good time frame, or do you know?
For me, Mr. Chairman?
I mean, for meetings, do you have a sense of what might work best?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I will say I just on my own end, I have 2 meetings. I have a meeting the last week of October, one the first week in November. I believe corporations meets the following week, the second week in November, 10th and 11th, from the good Senate Chairman. But I do believe there are some open dates within that time frame that may work.
Okay, sounds good. Ms. Sessions?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Where did we end up on the eminent domain piece? That was a conforming section, correct?
Eminent domain was out. That group is going to work on it, but I think it was the consensus that it's out.
Okay, thank you.
All right, so I think we'll move on past this. The last topic for consideration is electrical easements, pole attachments. And I don't know if Sean Taylor showed up to give us an update. I think, I don't think that there's going to be, that we're going anywhere with this, but I'll see where Sean is. There he is. All right. So when Sean gets connected, and he gets live on the air. Sean, there you go. All right, Sean Taylor, the executive director of the Wyoming Rural Electric Association, has been kind of running to ground this idea of electric easements and utilizing electric easements for broadband, and working with the group that you see here, including Farm Bureau, stock growers, industry, to see whether there's any traction could be made on this front. So Sean, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Great. Can you all hear me okay?
Good.
Okay. Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, Sean Taylor, Executive Director of the Wyoming Rural Electric Association. And as the chairman said, I've kind of been tasked with pulling together this working group that the chairman mentioned, providers, rural telecom, landowners, to discuss if it makes sense, if we could all kind of agree that it makes sense to either have legislation drafted perfecting electrical easements. I think this has been a really good discussion you all have had today, and I'm happy to hear that you're making some headway on with the BLM and with the state on their rights of ways. When it comes to the private rights of ways, I guess one thing I'd point out, and it may be obvious to a lot of folks, most of you on the call here, but we share a lot of the same membership with rural telecom companies, along with the stock growers and along with the Farm Bureau. And I know you're gonna hear from all those folks today, and they can correct me if I'm wrong in my summary of our latest conference call, but we had a Zoom call last week. And I think the general consensus, again, I want to reiterate from the electric cooperatives perspective, and I hate to sound like a broken record, but I think it bears repeating. Our co-ops aren't interested in getting into the ISP business, but we want to do everything we can to help because we have the same, we have the same membership that are kind of clamoring for broadband, and those folks at the end of the line. And I think Ms. Zerga hit on a good point earlier today, talking about the mid-mile. You got to get the mid-mile before you get to the guy at the end of the line. So I'm glad you all are focusing on that as well. But when it comes to using our easements, or we also have as part of our, and I know you guys are a task force and there might be another working group, and I think we're calling ourselves a working group, but within this working group, we also have the other electric utility providers, Rocky Mountain Power, Black Hills, and MDU included in the working group, because it may be that you need to use some of their rights of ways to get out into the rural area, where then you could possibly use our rights of ways. So I think the collective feeling was that legislation, while it could be a good tool in the toolbox, might not be the silver bullet that the broadband folks are looking for, that you all are looking for, simply because of distances. And if it's distances between poles, what kind of impact it would have on the land and the landowners. And so while I think, and again, anybody that comes after me can correct me, I think we're all willing to work on legislation if that's something you all think is necessary. We're happy to do that. We did talk about possibly putting together within this working group boilerplate language or a template landowner agreement easement language that would be between the electric utility, if you're using our easements, the landowner, and the broadband that wants to put in the fiber or the microwave or whatever. And so I think we kind of landed on that, where we'll work together in the very near future, putting together some type of agreement. So it's short of legislation, but an agreement that the landowner folks can take to their membership and say, if a broadband provider comes to you with this language, and they bring it to the co-op or the electric utility, and it might be quicker if we have that language ready to go, and if everybody, at least in the working group, signs off. I know, we can't all speak for the entirety of our membership or our customers, but short of legislation, we thought possibly this boilerplate language or template might be a good answer. And so with that, Mr. Chairman, that was kind of the crux of our call last week. Again, we're happy to work on legislation if you all think that would be the best solution. But short of that, we're willing to put together some type of a draft agreement to share with you all and with all of our memberships.
Well, Sean, first of all, thank you for your personal work on this, and everybody in the group that worked on it. I don't think we're going to push any legislation that you all don't think one is going to move the needle, right? If it's not going to move the needle, why go through the bother? It's I think as I look at the biggest beneficiaries I see as I look at the Farm Bureau and the stock growers folks is those of us in very rural Wyoming that maybe struggle with internet. Is it a tool that could be used? And if it's really not looking like a viable tool that's going to solve those problems, then it's probably not worth the pain. But I do appreciate your time, Sean. And what I'm going to do is I'll just run through all of you folks. If we could run through you fairly quickly, and then we will take some questions of the entire group from the body. So Liz, I got you up. Are you on my list anyway? Are you still around, and you have anything you'd like to say on this? I'm not seeing Liz, so I'm going to go next to Jim Magagna. Jim, welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Jim Magagna with the Wyoming Stockholders Association, and appreciate the opportunity to be with you today. And I particularly appreciated working on the group that Sean brought together on this topic. It certainly helped us to develop a lot better understanding of what the telecom people see as their potential needs for broadband expansion in terms of access, and what we may have thought was the focus that maybe isn't so much the focus. So in the interest of time, I'll certainly concur with what Sean has laid in front of you. Just add a couple of things. First, based on our policy at Stockboard, we're starting from the premise that we would not be supportive of any significant expansion of eminent domain. And in part, that's because based on what we've seen to date, we don't feel it's necessary, that there are other ways to meet our mutual objective here. And certainly our objective is to bring broadband access to our rural members out there to the fullest extent possible. So what I envision along the lines of what Sean talked about is that some of our group can sit down and continue to talk about a process that would facilitate getting landowner agreement to utilize some of these existing lines that REA or other utilities might have in place, to, in a very straightforward way, expand those, use them for broadband where it's feasible. Sure that it's done in a way that if there's any damage to private property as a result of that extended use, that there's appropriate compensation put in place for that. But make it as simple a process as possible, because I think the key to so much of this is good, open, and upfront communication with landowners, so they don't feel threatened, but before anyone knocks on their door, they see opportunity. And that's what we would hope to convey through this process. And as we go forward with that, and I would hope we can go forward with your blessing with those types of discussions, and do so sort of uninhibited by what the current statutes may say to some degree. Then when we come up with a product that we truly feel works for everyone's interest, we'll look at the statutes and say, you know, does this all fit within the statutory framework? Or at that point, do we need to come back to you and your committee with recommendations for any statutory change to accommodate what we're proposing? So, Mr. Chairman, that's the approach that we believe has merit. We're certainly committed to it. And with that, I would be happy to entertain any questions from the committee.
So I think, and thanks, Jim, I appreciate that. I think next I'll go to Brett Moline. Brett?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll try not to repeat anything the two previous speakers have said. That the Wyoming Farm Bureau Federation that I work for does strongly support getting affordable, dependable internet services out to our members. And it's our members that are at the head of the creek. They're going to be the most expensive to serve. Talking with some of my members, they're utilizing some other technology rather than fiber optics. They're using satellite or repeater stations. So maybe some technology changes are coming up that will be dependable and affordable, and we won't need to look at changing any of the laws. I got a gut feeling that my members will not support the legislatively expanding an easement, electrical easement, to automatically include a communications network. I've got some policy that's coming forward from a county. It hasn't passed the state yet, but our annual meeting's coming up here in about 2 months. So I got a feeling I won't be able to support any expansion legislatively of a current easement to incorporate other uses, but look forward to working with the group. We understand that it is what used to be a luxury is now becoming a necessity, and that's the dependable, affordable internet service. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I would sit for any questions.
Thanks, Brett. I appreciate it. Liz?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I agree with all the previous speakers. My membership has looked at this. Some of my members have worked cooperatively with the electric utility in their area and have worked on joint builds, and that has worked out well. That doesn't involve usually expanding an existing easement, which is the kind of bill that we were talking about. Rather, that's everybody goes out and jointly shares the easement. I also have other carriers who are working with transmission electric companies to be able to work with them. And then we found in some areas where it just, we've explored it and it doesn't make any sense because poles are too far. So it's not workable. So it's really a case by case basis. And you've heard the representatives from the landowner. They're not very excited about expanding existing easement rights. And so it's not something that we've put at the top priority. And it's not something we feel we have to have. I think it would be a pretty heavy lift. I've looked at a lot of the bills that have been worked on thanks to Sean Taylor circulating some of those, and then we had seen some ourselves. Many of those bills were pushed as a result of the rural electrics wanting to get in to be ISPs, and that's what prompted that, wanting to expand their own easements to be able to provide service. So from our perspective, it's not something that we are going to advocate that we have to get done. And I think we'll just continue to work with the representatives of the Farm Bureau and of the Stock Growers Association with Sean Taylor to see if there's anything we can do outside the legislative realm to maybe streamline some of the paperwork.
Thank you, Ms. Zerga. So Sean, I appreciate it, and I think, you know, I think the committee would, if you guys come up with a product, great. You know, if it's something that you find that you need maybe some legislation to take a look at to change on the lines of what Mr. McGagnon was talking about, that's great. I appreciate you guys getting together and thinking about it. Jim and Brett, I do worry about access, affordable access for your members and people like me. It's right now, it's not very affordable unless you're one of the lucky ones. So I do hope I hope we find better ways and more ways for those people way down that ranch road to get internet and reliable internet, affordable internet. So with that, committee, do you guys have any questions of these good folks that took their time and worked on this issue? Nope. Well, I really appreciate it. And like I said, I think continue to, you know, work together all you want. And if you come up with something where you think you need some legislative backing, you know, give us a holler. How's that?
Mr. Chairman?
Please go ahead.
Just a quick question. Do you all have another meeting scheduled before the end of the year?
Sean, I think we are going to have another one, maybe end of October, 1st of November, because we're going to have some bills that we may bring out into other committees.
Okay. I'll talk with our working group, and if we can pull like that boilerplate language together before then, I'll let you know.
Sounds good. Yeah, if it works, that's fine. If not, we'll do it another time. So I really appreciate your effort. Thank you for taking your time to work on this. Thank you.
You bet. Thanks.
And with that, I think we're getting close to done. I know Senator Dockstader and I have another meeting at 3, but just a thought, just, you know, as I look at this group that I've got in front of me now in our committee, are there any other things that we could do to move the needle, things we should look at that we're not looking at? And that's a question I ask Ryan Kudra, the broadband manager, and one I would continue to ask the council, the Broadband Advisory Council. you know, what's next? What can we do? And so Representative Lindholm, please.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I alluded to this earlier, but that the grant that the governor did in regards to the CARES Act, we're on course right now not to spend all of the CARES Act funds. And, you know, obviously we spent like 60 some million out of the 100 million suggested and that the governor had set forth. I guess I don't see the problem of having competitive services. I don't understand why, and this goes to what Mr. Glass had stated earlier. I don't see why the denial was put in for multiple types of services going into different areas. That we still got another 40 million out there. I mean, heck, we might even be able to do more. What's wrong with having too much broadband in the state of Wyoming? And that I guess my suggestion would be something else we could do is shoot, let's send a letter to the governor and say, kick it in the tail. Keep going. You're doing great. We're with you. Run the
So
ball.
I think, yeah, so Representative Lindholm, I think we made that recommendation to, you know, for a phase 2 and to continue to do that. And Representative Lindholm, there is language in an appropriations bill that, you know, I'm probably going to continue to work on that as a bill. If we end up going into session and there's money available and it becomes a gold rush on money in the session for CARES Act because of an extension, I hope that we have a broadband bill ready to grab some of that. So it's my
Mr.
hope.
Chairman, that's not what I was saying. And I support the letter saying, hey, if there's a phase 2 or if it's extended, yeah, I support that. That's great. What I'm saying is right now, we're sitting on the money right now, and if we don't do something with it, it's going to be gone. So what I'm suggesting is we send a letter to the governor right now saying, run the ball. We're with you. Do it now.
Spend the 10 million, you're saying.
I'm saying spend the other 40 million that was originally in the grant. I mean, we denied some companies because they A, didn't want to do this, or B, didn't meet the quotas. I mean, we heard from the experts in regards to that. Okay, why did we deny them? Can we go back and look at those? We got the priorities out of the way. You guys still interested? If it's yes and yes, why not spend it? I guess would be my suggestion for this group. I know that's probably out of some people's comfort zone, but we got that extra 40 million. More broadband is good.
Yeah, I think the question, Representative Lindholm, is there time enough to get that done now before the end of the year?
I can make it real easy. We'll find out where everybody's at. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make a motion to send a letter from this committee to the governor suggesting that he spend the rest of those original funds in regards to his broadband grant and to revisit the issue.
Is there a second to the motion? Seconded by Representative Harshman. Discussion.
Question
having been called. Senator Wasserberger first.
Mr. Chairman, I was ready to vote.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I'm not sure I have a vote on this committee, but I was ready to vote.
Yeah.
Maybe
I don't know
let
that
me
you
know if I have a vote.
Yeah, I don't know that you have a vote, but I don't think you do, but I appreciate your enthusiasm. Ms. Schoenfeld, please.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I just want to point out that a lot of the funds that were not given out, or a lot of the applications that were not granted, are due to overbuild, which is specific in the broadband council bill, Senate File 100. And that was a very big concern of our providers with this whole process. So I would keep that in mind when looking at this, and that there was a lot of concern about this and overbuild potential in the first place. And the Wyoming Business Council was attempting to stay within fair guidelines for all of our providers and walk a very fine line. And there were a lot of meetings around that with the governor's office and the providers as well to get their input. So.
Senator Dockstetter.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think the providers, they studied it, they looked at it. I'm not sure that we need to go back and revisit this at this time.
Thank you. Any other comments? Senator Landon.
Mr. Chairman, just with respect to what I think the co-chairman of corporations is saying, I think if there's an ability to take a look at a second level of those proposals, I don't see any harm in that. I'm sensitive to what Ms. Schoenfeld just told us. I get that, but we get one shot at this federal stimulus money that came to us. And I just think one more look is not going to hurt us a bit. And you know what, if we can put 2 or 3 more projects on the ground, I agree with the chairman. You know, let's, even if there's a little bit of duplication, I'll bet someday we'll use it. Thank you.
Ms. Sessions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just maybe a question for Lauren. So out of the 171 million, I think, there was 84 initially awarded, only 60, I think, actually accepted. What was the other, my math's correct, 80 or 90 million? Were those all overbilled?
Ms. Schoenfeld.
Mr. Chairman, I don't have specific numbers. They were not all overbilled. There were some that didn't meet requirements as being registered with the Secretary of State. There were some that didn't want to agree to the contractual agreement with the Secretary of State. So, I mean, there were some other side things that I can text Ryan really quick and see if I can get an answer for you.
Ms. Sessions.
Thank you. So I guess I agree with Representative Lindholm. If there are people out there who want to take another crack at it and can get it done, I'm hesitant to say that, you know, the timing is going to allow it, but, you know, if it's not moving in on federally funded areas or some of those other stipulations, let's take another look at it.
Sounds good. You know, I'm going to vote for this just as a personal comment. I get the overbuild thing, but frankly, we need to get internet out to people, and I would just assume, you know, all this is a recommendation to take another look at it. So I'm probably going to support this. So if there's no other comments, all those in favor of the motion, raise your hand. All those opposed? Motion carries. So Brian, I guess add that to the list. Are you there, Brian?
Yep, will do.
Okay, sounds good. I appreciate it. So with that, you know, I guess if there's no other business, I think we will end this meeting. I do appreciate everybody's work. I don't want this broadband task force to go on forever. I think the Broadband Advisory Council, it's their job to become more effective and to do this kind of work. We are here to, you know, kind of push this right now at this time because there's a real need, and I think there's a real need for really good broadband in the state of Wyoming. If we're gonna move this economy in another direction, which we're eventually going to have to, we have to do this hard work. We have to do this stuff. So Representative Lindholm, please.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Now, I wanted to make a comment on the Broadband Advisory Council because there's been no bigger critic in the Wyoming legislature than me. And I even had a bill drafted once to repeal them, just to get rid of them. And I've really been heartened in the last, I don't know, however long Mr. Kucher's been there. He testified to our corporations committee the other day. He's got that application finally going and finally built out for this whole deal. And I'm not saying that the fellow that was in there was doing a bad job. I just think his priorities were in a whole nother direction than what the legislature had set out. And so I really appreciate the work and have heart in regards to the Broadband Advisory Council and their director now, as far as the direction that that's going. And I hope they build on that. I think they're starting to see some momentum, and I'd like to see them just run the ball as hard as they can. I think it'd be great.
Thank you. Any other final comments? All right, thank you. We'll end the meeting. Meeting adjourned.
Albert, you got to send